60,000 tons of oil leaked out of an oil transformer station near Oslo in a suspected sabotage act. The European Union stepped up financial support for Syria but said investments hinge on a credible and inclusive transition. Roughly 60,000 tons of oil leaked out of an oil transformer station near Oslo on Sunday. Reportedly, a hole had been cut in a fence surrounding the premises, and the cover at the bottom of the transformer was unscrewed and left open.
Det ser ut til at noen har brutt seg inn og skrudd av et deksel nede på transformatoren, og så latt det stå åpent sånn at det rent ut masse olje.
National Power Grid operator Statnett believe the incident was an act of deliberate sabotage. However, police authorities said in a statement that they currently had no concrete evidence to confirm so. While the oil is not harmful to humans, it can have a detrimental impact on the environment. Oil barriers and absorbents have been deployed to contain and clean up the spill.
US President Donald Trump says he will discuss ending the war in Ukraine with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin on Tuesday. His comments come after Ukraine agreed to a US-brokered ceasefire plan last week. Trump said territorial issues and power plants are going to be part of Tuesday's conversation.
By Tuesday, I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday. And a lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance. And we'll be talking about land, we'll be talking about power plants. That's up, it's a big question.
Press Secretary for Putin confirmed the Russian leader is scheduled to speak with Trump on Tuesday. Last Thursday, Putin said he supported a truce but listed several questions he said still had to be discussed. The diplomatic efforts to secure a ceasefire deal come as Russia and Ukraine traded drone fire over the weekend and into Monday morning.
Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, visited Paris on Monday to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron, seeking European support as U.S. President Donald Trump continues to attack Canada's sovereignty and economy. Since Trump came to office, he has imposed sweeping tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminium and repeatedly commented on turning Canada into the 51st U.S. state, infuriating Canadians and sparking a call to boycott U.S. products across the country. Carney said he hopes to work with France and the rest of Europe to maintain positive relations with the U.S.
With you, Mr. President, I want to ensure that France and the whole of Europe works enthusiastically with Canada, the most European of non-European countries, determined like you to maintain the most positive possible relations with the United States.
It's a powerful message. Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, chose France as his first foreign trip since taking office last Friday. And just as tensions are at an all-time high between Canada and the U.S., Carney is signaling that he wants to get closer to his European allies, including French President Emmanuel Macron. Both Macron and Carney said on Monday that it's important to continue to support Ukraine as well as European security at a time when U.S. President Donald Trump is growing closer to Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Carney's itinerary signals that Canada is growing closer to its former colonial powers rather than with its traditional ally and direct neighbor, the United States.
The United States carried out new airstrikes on Yemen on Monday after both the Trump administration and the Iran-backed Houthis vowed escalation over the weekend. The Houthi-run health ministry said that at least 53 people have been killed since the U.S. began its new wave of strikes against the rebel group on Saturday, including 5 children and 2 women. The Houthis retaliated on Sunday with attacks on the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier and its accompanying warships. The U.S. said its strikes aim to deter the rebels from attacking military and commercial vessels in the Red Sea. The Houthis said last week they would resume targeting Israeli vessels after Israel cut off humanitarian aid to Gaza this month. The U.S. airstrikes were among the most extensive attacks against the Houthis since the war in Gaza began in October of 2023.
It's a scene unimaginable a few months ago. On Monday, Syria's interim foreign minister represented Damascus in an EU conference on Syria's future. The European Union doubled down on its support for the country's transition after the fall of al-Assad, unveiling €2.5 billion and committing to further investments if the new authorities steer the country towards an inclusive, stable future.
We are ready to do more to attract the necessary investments for reconstruction as the political transition advances towards a credible, an inclusive and non-sectarian government.
But despite hope, there is also fear. Brutal violence recently erupted in Syria's northwest between gunmen linked to the new Sunni Islamist-led government and pro-Assad insurgents, with more than 1,300 reportedly killed. The UN says Alawite communities were mostly targeted.
The violence outbreak is very worrying, and it shows that the hope in Syria is really hanging by thread.
I think that we have to be more vocal on both directions, which is clearly expressing when those things happen that no impunity would be allowed, and we want that this kind of situation won't be repeated.
Also on the table, what the transition means for Syrians in Europe. The UN's refugee agency says 60% of Syrian refugees have voiced an interest in returning to their home country. But the UN's migration chief told Euronews that discussions on the return of refugees cannot take place without commitment to investing in Syria's future.
What we're encouraging states to do is to really invest in this peace-building process, invest in the revitalization of Syria, invest in humanitarian assistance. Because what we do know is that if people go home and they're subjected to violence, or they don't feel safe, or they don't have a future, then they'll migrate out again.
The European Union says that after 14 years of civil war, it can now work together with the government in Damascus to ensure this is the beginning of a better chapter in Syria's history. It wants to invest further in Syria. It could further ease sanctions, and it's touting a role for the European Investment Bank in the reconstruction of the country. But the recent eruption of violence in the northwest of the country is a reminder that the situation is still volatile. The interim president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, is a former al-Qaeda commander, and the rebel group he led to topple the al-Assad regime is still listed as a terrorist organization by the European Union. But despite all that, officials here say that for now, the de facto Syrian government is the best hope for Syria. Marit Gwyn for Euronews in Brussels.
Ex-President of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, has been sentenced to a further 4.5 years in prison, bringing his total sentence up to 12 years and 6 months. On Monday, the court sentenced him on charges of illegally crossing Georgia's border when returning from exile in Ukraine in 2021, when he was immediately arrested. Saakashvili, who served as Georgia's president from 2004 to 2013, had previously been sentenced on charges of abuse of power and embezzlement that opposition parties have labelled as politically motivated. I am being judged for daring and managing to transform Georgia into a successful state, for defeating corruption, for striving for the people and not for my own pocket, he explained on a video conference call in court on Monday. In 2003, Saakashvili led the so-called Rose Revolution protests. In office, he reorientated Georgia towards the west and embarked on an ambitious public sector reform. But in 2012, his United National Movement party lost the election to the Georgian Dream Party, which is currently in power and has been accused of tightening its grip on democratic freedoms while steering the country away from the EU membership and tilting towards Russia.
Representatives from Turkey, Greece, the UK, EU and the Turkish and Greek Cypriot leaders met in Geneva to discuss the possibility of reopening negotiations and reunification of the Mediterranean island. Cyprus has remained divided since 1974, when Turkish forces invaded and occupied the northern part of the island.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is hosting talks in the imposing Palais des Nations in Geneva to discuss the future of Cyprus with Greek and Turkish Cypriot leaders and representatives from Greece, Turkey and the United Kingdom, which are the guarantor states. During the talks, the representatives will explore the possibility of reopening negotiations for a solution. The island remains divided and occupied more than 50 years after the invasion of the Turkish forces. While supporters of a solution value the mere convening of the meeting, they acknowledge that expectations are very low. According to Turkish diplomatic sources, the meeting is expected to discuss views on the Cyprus issue for the upcoming period and is not meant to be a continuation of past negotiation processes or the beginning of a new negotiation process. On the other hand, shortly before departing for Geneva, the President of the Republic of Cyprus, Nikos Christodoulidis, spoke of limited expectations, but at the same time he said that during the talks they should exploit all the possibilities for reopening the negotiations. Whether this is a meeting that will confirm the gap in the views of the two sides or pave the way for new talks remains to be seen in the next hours when the two sides show their cards. Faye Dulgari, Euronews, Geneva.